We are live. I hope that you can see this. And good morning to
Morning.
everybody. Good morning. Good morning, Dylan. Good morning, team. And also, happy Christmas. Merry Christmas
Merry Christmas.
to
Merry
everybody who
Christmas.
celebrates it. Yes, Merry Christmas. And thank you for
Yeah.
being with us on this Christmas morning of the year 2024. It's December 25th. And we have the pleasure of welcoming Dylan Monaghan with us here. And I would like to introduce him very briefly before I give him the screen and the word. Before that, though, please allow me to say thank you to our first sponsor, Kanchu, at kanachu.com. Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku is the full name of the company. They are based in Yokohama and they offer bilingual services in buying and selling real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama. They do property management and investment property as well. If you want to work with them, please reach out to James Howell. He is on LinkedIn. He's very active there. You can find his email address in the description of the video on YouTube as well. It is james@kanachu.com. Connect with him and work with him. So thank you very much for this. And Dylan,
Yeah.
I'm going to do a very brief introduction of you, as I said, so that we can actually hear you yourself talking about yourself and telling us your Japan story. Before that, again, Dylan, to everybody who hasn't met him yet, is an Asia Pacific aviation, space, and defense technical sales professional. He's also a veteran, and I apologize for it. We're going to talk about making the best of Japan's business environment as a US veteran here. So, Dylan, I'll give it to you now. Please, let's start the story and we'll jump in with questions and comments as well.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me on the show, Tim, Maya.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. We appreciate. We've been looking forward to it.
This has been a long time coming. And special day here. It is Christmas Day, December 25th, which is a normal business day in Japan. Although
Right.
Christmas is celebrated, we still do not get the day off, but it still is a great festive time. A little bit
Yeah.
about me. I was born in New York City,
Mhm.
and then about third grade moved to the Virgin Islands, where my dad worked as a computer programmer, when computer programming was still pretty special. I helped computerize the telephone system of the Virgin Islands. Stayed there till I was about 15 and moved back to New York on my own, and then ended up in an engineering school in Worcester. And from there, I discovered airplanes and flying, and then ended up going into ROTC, where I did get a flying scholarship, completed pilot training. My first assignment out of the Air Force was 1993 here in Japan at Yokota Air Base. Now, I had expected 2 years minimum, actually 2 years no more, and then I'd be off to Germany or Spain or somewhere. I'd studied Russian, I'd studied German, I studied Spanish. I was bound for Europe, except I learned a couple of words of Japanese while I was here, and apparently back in 1993 in the U.S. Air Force, that was pretty rare. As a result, I got to go to all of the self-defense force events. They sometimes called me up on stage to translate. I had no idea what anybody was saying, but I did my best. I invented words and it came off okay. And as those events kind of grew, I started learning more Japanese, ended up being an exchange officer in a Japanese base, flying Japanese aircraft, and ended up at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. So almost my entire career was here in Japan, with the exception of a short stint at headquarters PACAF in Honolulu, and then retired in 2012, where I've been doing various things here in Japan, which we're going to talk about today. That's a little bit about me. Now, I do like to fix things. I do like to create. I've written a couple of books. I help other people write books. And of course, the real goal, if you're living in Japan, is finding work that supports what you do and also helps companies grow.
Very much so. Well, I have a question. So, how come that you stayed in Japan beyond the 2 years you initially thought you would be here? What happened? If it is not too much to ask, if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine too. Just say so.
It's the ability to speak Japanese that kept me here.
I see.
It wasn't what started me here. The very first extension was as a C9 pilot. I was just a co-pilot getting ready to upgrade to the aircraft commander position. I needed one more year. So the tour was extended by a year so I could be a pilot in the left seat, control the airplane. Great, that makes sense. And then when it was
Yeah.
time to go to the next airplane after 3 years, uh, it ended up being back at Yokota, a C-130 aircraft. And same story there, to be
Mhm.
upgraded to instructor pilot and to stay one more year. So I stayed one more year. And then after that, again, getting ready to go back to the US, they said, there's this brand new exchange program. We need somebody to go do that who speaks Japanese, doesn't mind living in Japan, instructor of C-130s. Dylan, why don't you volunteer for that? And I said, no, I'm ready to go back to the US. But I was not aware that behind the scenes, there was a group of people in the self-defense force and US Air Force that if you can get Dylan in this seat, we'll execute the exchange program. The exchange program hadn't started yet, so I was the first C-130 pilot exchange officer. The program continues to today. So I ended up in that exchange program, and then we had the Twin Towers collapse, and that extended me. I ended up deploying into Kuwait with the Japanese, the first ever person to deploy overseas with the Japanese who wasn't Japanese, or wasn't rather self-defense force.
Wow.
And so quite an interesting turn of events. Ended up in Hawaii and then got a phone call from the headquarters. They pulled me out and said, we need you at the headquarters, Dylan. You have all the things we need. And then at the headquarters, I got another phone call. Said, Dylan, we need you back at the embassy right now. And so they pulled me back. So every one of those positions was someone calling me up and saying, Dylan, we need you. I never got my dream jobs. I put down Pentagon. I put down all kinds of great things. But the Air Force had other plans for me.
The dream sheet.
The dream, and I never did make it to Europe.
Yeah. Yep. Same story for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. You say I want to go overseas, and that
Yeah.
was my first bit. And they said overseas. You want to go overseas? Like, where are you thinking, Dylan? I'm like Germany, Europe. It's where everyone wants to go. It says great. We can give you Alaska or Japan. I'm
Wow.
like, Alaska's overseas? Isn't it cold there? And where is this country called Japan? I couldn't find Japan on a map if you'd asked me to. I'd heard about
Yeah.
Sony and Toyota,
Yeah.
and that was about it.
Mhm.
So I showed up completely unaware of anything in Japan. It was quite the shock.
Wow, I
Yes.
can relate to that because I was unaware of anything, and I came to Japan several years after you did. And but still, at that time, it was very difficult to find any information about the country in Europe and in my home country, Bulgaria. Of course, I had watched the samurai movies, the tiger drama, some of them, and I watched Shogun, read James Clavel's novels, but that was more or less
Oh, then,
all I got. Yes, all of it. So
did you?
totally,
Yeah.
yeah,
I also read the James Clavell Shogun novel,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so
right.
Right. Right.
that I read
The
in
gateway.
Japan. I'd landed in Japan, knew nothing about Japan,
Hmm.
and said, "Where do you start?" So I'm in the BX on base, going, "What books are here?" Shogun was there.
Hmm.
Gateway to Japan was another book I found. It was like your tour guide, give you a brief history of the language, the culture, and then places to visit in Japan. So
Yeah.
that
Right.
Yeah.
initial opening chapter, Gateway to Japan, gave me my first glimpse of the language.
Hmm. Right. And then, so fast forward from that time, you came to Japan in 1993, and then you retired from the military in 2012. So, what you always were called to duty when people others needed you, but then how did they let you go? Was it because you insisted on going your own way, or was it the term, well, a term that eventually expired, or what happened?
Uh, well, let's back up a step. When I first went into college, and my plan was to be an engineer, I loved taking things apart, I loved fixing things, and I studied electrical engineering. So that was my plan. The pit stop off to the military was supposed to be just a quick 4 year stint so they could pay for my college. That was the plan. They had the
Okay.
ROTC, I had a scholarship, and why not? I felt red, white, and blue serving my country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in that time in college, I started asking people on active duty. I'd go to visit different bases, and I'd just walk around and say, what do you think about being in the military? And universally at that time, back in the 80s, late 80s, everyone was eager to get out. No one enjoyed their job. I said, this
Mm-hmm.
is what I'm signing up for. And then I accidentally met some pilots, helicopter pilots actually, in Boston. And they enjoyed what they did. I'm like, well, I want to enjoy my time too. So I went, got my pilot's license. I'd started
Mm-hmm.
flying already, completed the license. So that puts me up. I was selected for the pilot training. At the end of pilot
Wow.
training, they said you have 10 years that you must fly with the service. Not 4, 10.
10 years.
That's fine. I'll do 10 years and then go back to engineering. That was my idea.
Mm-hmm.
The young 22-year-old Dylan. I had no intention of staying in for 20 to begin with. So
Right.
how did I end up at 20? Well, at 10 years, I was in Komaki as an exchange officer, really outside the main Air Force deal.
Mm-hmm.
And no one called me up to say, Dylan, what are you doing? Your 10 years are up. What's the plan? So there I am in Komaki going, oh, well, we got this big mission going on. I'm flying into Kuwait. Why don't I just finish this mission? And at the time, they had this thing called a bonus. If you stayed for 10 more years, they'd pay you more.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
I didn't have any
Incentive.
reason to get out at that time, so they're going to pay me more. So yeah, I signed on the line that was dotted,
Mm-hmm.
and that was good to 20 years. So at 20 years, I looked around and said, well, no one's calling for me. No one's asking for me to go somewhere. My entire career had been people calling me up. So I just said, well, I guess it's time to go.
Right.
So it really didn't have much deep thought. It was really just I'd never planned to stay in. Why don't I just see what happens out there now?
At the same time, I think, well, from my personal experience, I think that when you have stayed in one place for quite a while, and for you it was 2 decades, it's really difficult to make up your mind and leave, because it's really difficult. The world out there is very scary. That's something that you don't know almost anything about, right? You have been in, well, that same place for 20 years. You have worked with your colleagues, and you know the order there, but it's kind of an entirely new world out there.
Well,
So how
to
did
be
you feel?
honest, I never stayed in the same place for 20 years. I was
Well,
constantly moving. And so
Yeah.
every
okay.
3 to 4 years, even within Japan, I was moving to a different house, a different squadron, moved to Komaki, moved to the
Hmm.
embassy, moved in Hawaii. For me, moving was just the normal kind of living. So
Hmm.
if you kept me somewhere for more than 3 or 4 years, I got the itch. Time to go. Where are we going? And it was like that at the end. I'm like, what? Well, we got to get up and get going. I've been in this house for 4 years. Let's go.
Right.
So the fear that others may have of moving is not usual for me. I've been moving since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. The
Hmm.
longest
Yeah.
I've
Right.
ever lived in any one house was when I was at the embassy, 6 years.
Right. So, well, my question then is a follow-up question. So, when you're in the military, you moved every 2 or 3 years, and so you are not a person who stays longer. You don't catch what's the proverb there? A rolling stone doesn't
Rolling Stone grows no moss, catches no
grows
moss.
no moss. Yes, exactly. So you're not one of those people that stayed anywhere for a longer period of time. At the same time, when you're in an organization, so that pays your salary, you know that whatever happens, that salary will be, transferred into your bank account. So how was that on the other, from this aspect, moving from the military to the civil world? Because suddenly you have to find a job. You have to really look for companies that would appreciate your skills. And I also remember that when we had the preliminary talk, the chat between the three of us, you said that when you're a military guy, you say, well, to the question, okay, what can you do for us? You the answer that comes back is, Well, I can do anything you want me to do, and that's not the right answer for many companies that recruit employees, right? So, how was that period of time for you?
That's a great question, and I love that you picked Rolling Stone gathers no moss
Mm-hmm.
because that's a completely different meaning in English and Japanese. In English,
Right.
it's a good thing. Rolling, gathering no
Mm-hmm.
moss, is seen as the
Yeah.
way to be. Whereas in Japan, it's the
Yeah.
exact
They like
opposite.
moss.
Please sit still. You're never going to get the good-looking moss if you keep moving like
We
that.
want the
What are you
moss,
doing?
of course.
We want the moss.
Yeah, it's a
And so
very
it's interesting
important
when we
part
use,
of the landscape. Yes, please go on. Sorry.
yeah, it's fascinating when you're bridging these two things. And yeah, you're right. Uh, Getting out of the military, where I got paid whether I worked hard or didn't work hard, to now I'm going into a completely different world where I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know if I was ever going to get paid. I thought that I was just a good-looking guy who could do anything, and companies would be snapping me up left and right. So I said, "Bring it on! I'm ready to roll. I'm the most
Uh,
awesome thing since sliced bread. You're all going to be craving for me. I know it. Which offer am I going to take?" And that
Confidence.
wasn't what happened. I had confidence in spades,
Yeah.
but the company that was chasing me, I learned later that companies can appear to want you, and they'll say nice things to you, and they'll encourage you at dinners and all kinds of things. But there's a lot happening inside the company that we don't know
Mm-hmm.
about.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the company has to say, how is this person going to benefit our program? So you're absolutely right. Walking into a company saying I can do anything is probably the worst thing I could have said, and I said it everywhere. And it shows because I didn't get picked up with that attitude.
But I think you
Right.
almost have to be a little bit delusional at that age. And I mean, I think it's wired into us because I don't know, we're still too dumb to figure out what we don't know. And sometimes confidence is good, but you're right, it's painful too because you learn reality sometimes punches you in the nose, you know. And
Absolutely.
my confidence peaked in my 30s, and then after that, I started like questioning all my assumptions, you know, like maybe
Mm.
overthinking, some might say, but it's just interesting. Yeah, you know, it's kind of uncanny, Dylan. Like we have a lot of overlap. I mean, I never went into aviation. I wasn't an officer. I was enlisted. I went in real young, but I went in for like similar reasons. Like, hey, if I go in, I get the GI Bill. It'll pay for my college. Get in and out, while I'm young. So I got out when I was like 21, and but I had no grand plan. Like I just
No.
was waiting for things to happen, and if I saw
Yep.
opportunity, if it knocked, I opened the door. That was my plan. You know, it was nothing thought out too deeply. But I was also reluctant to come to Japan. It was like a reluctant last third choice on my on the dream sheet, and they told us we're all going to Misawa. My buddy and I, we picked Atsugi. We had no idea where Atsugi was. We just picked it that day just to be rebels. And out of like, I don't know, 30, 40 people, we were only two that went to Atsugi, which was a great move. It totally changed my life with no thought whatsoever that I put into that decision, you know. But I came here kicking and screaming. I think, like you, it was kind of before Japan was cool, you know. It
Oh
was
yeah.
like nobody wanted to go to Japan back then. This is
Mm-hmm.
No.
77, right?
Yep.
And I came here kicking and screaming. And a year later, I was in love with it. All it took was making some cool Japanese friends. That's all it took,
Makes the
and
difference.
I was hooked. You know, so and then just a little trivia. When I lived in Hawaii, we also lived in Hawaii. Another common point. Um, through the Japan America Society, I knew the president, who was ex Air Force, and I got two gigs. I trained two Air Force generals prior to being deployed to Japan. One was General Rice, and the other was General Fields, and they were both going to Yokota. And
Wait a minute. General Field and General, it's Air Force generals?
yeah, yeah,
Are you talking about the
yeah.
General Rice who was the head of the Air Education Training Command?
I don't know. I just met him as the next, top guy, in the Pacific, and
What year was that?
oh God, early 2000s, maybe 2010ish, maybe I did it twice, so there were maybe it was like 4 years apart.
Well,
But
this is going to blow your mind here because the
yeah.
general that called me up and brought me to headquarters PACAF, the guy who says, I need you here, was General Fields.
Oh,
He was
really?
a
He's
one
a good
star.
guy. He's like a good old boy, right? Really good guy.
And the general who arrived when I
Really
was
good.
at PACAF was General Rice.
Oh.
And so
General,
we've
that guy
overlapped
was
in
a
both of
straight
those.
shooter, man. That General Rice was there was two different. I went in and everybody on his team was involved in it, and it was a very formal dinner. It was very military, and then General Fields came next, and it was laid back, just him and his wife, and we just laid back and casually went through the training material. It was like two completely different experiences, but both interesting.
So
So,
I got to work directly for General Rice at headquarters PACAF
oh,
and got to know him
interesting.
fairly well. He had a very professional face on, and he would
Yeah,
scare the bejesus. You sit
he
in the
did.
conference room.
People were
One day
nervous.
I'm in XP, and they say, Dylan, what are you
Yeah,
doing right now? I'm like, right now, nothing. It's great. Take this briefing on Global Hawk, run down to this room, and brief it. I've never seen a
yeah,
Global Hawk. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's on these slides, but I do as I'm told. I run down the hall because the meeting's starting, like it's now. You can't get any more last minute than this. I walk into that briefing room and it's all colonels, full bird colonels. And at the time, I'm a major. So I'm the lowest rank, and my seat, there's only one open seat. It's XP, it's at the end of the table. And everyone's sitting ramrod straight. I've never seen full bird colonels this just not a word,
yeah.
not a smile, no chit-chatting going
Right,
on, just straight
right.
back sitting up there. These are folks at the top of the food chain. Who are they
Yeah,
worried about is what I'm thinking. I'm like, well, if they're worried, what should I
Mm.
be? Now, I should tell you, I don't really have much fear of people. I never have.
yeah,
But I was really looking forward to what was going on.
yeah.
So,
Right.
on time, at the time of the start of the meeting, I did make it in time. General Rice walks in a side door, and the room stands up at attention. He says, begin, just one word, in that very
Yep,
commanding voice he has. And he sits down,
yep.
everyone sits down. And then on the screen are my slides. It's the first time I'm seeing them. I've never seen these slides. So I start
Yeah,
reading the information on the slides. I'm reading them. It's just one slide. And then General Rice asked a very good, insightful, appropriate question. Like, if you're briefing this, you should know this thing. And I look at him and says, I don't know. And then General Rice sits with his fingers up. If you've ever seen him doing this, and he's staring right at me. He doesn't look away. He's not lost in space. He's
he doesn't
staring at me,
blink.
doesn't blink, and it's easily 3 to 5 minutes. Now, if you've ever been stared at for 3 to 5 minutes, it feels like an eternity. It is not 3 minutes. It could be 10 days for all I
Yeah,
know. And I'm standing there going,
yeah,
well, what do I do now? And at the end of
yeah.
about 3 to 5 minutes, he goes, is this your first time seeing these slides? I go, yes, sir. He says, sit down. And so I had
Oh,
lots
Yes,
of run-ins with him, but I really enjoyed working with him because he knew how to get the mission done. He knew how to put on a face. But if you weren't ready for it, you'd really throw you off. Like the time I'm on a golf course, as
right.
yeah.
in XP, I got to take a lot of the Japanese generals who would come and Korean generals. I was always setting up golf dates for them. I often wonder if they just did meetings in Hawaii just for the golf.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
General Rice is an amazing golfer. He is scratch
Oh, is it
golf.
Helix? Yeah, Helix.
He
Yeah,
is amazing. And so he's on the putting green and he's done practice putting and he's walking, he's beelining it straight to me. He's coming straight to me. I'm in my blues, my short sleeves, pull back my shoulder to see what will the general ask me now. I had all the run-ins. I'm ready for him. His wife is there. I'd see his wife. She's also out for the golf. He walks straight through me. He wasn't walking to me. He had something on the other side of me that he was going to. I didn't exist. And he
yeah,
literally knocked my shoulder as he walked by. Now, I wasn't expecting him to continue walking. I thought he was going to stop right up where I was. So I'm standing still in parade rest, waiting for the general to address me. I was not ready for getting knocked over. And I quickly regained my composure as I look over, and his wife looks at me and goes, sorry. I'm like, oh, this is normal. Got it. So
Okay.
all those run-ins, when you learn how people operate, this is something I
Yeah.
learned. You can't
Yeah.
always be a happy, smiling person in every event. If you watch Japanese
Yeah.
at the police department, fire department,
Mm.
Japanese don't smile in those roles. That's like a child. You have to be with a good face. If you're in Russia, you keep your face clean. You're walking around with a big smile. That's for American idiots. And so as you walk around to the different countries and different places, you go, oh, there's a way to be in this role. And so, yes,
Yeah. Absolutely.
really enjoyed
Yeah.
General Rice and General Fields. Great, great guys. By the
Yeah.
way, General Fields cracked me up because he called me directly while I was in Komaki. I've put together my dream sheet, and it's the Pentagon from 1 to 12. I added extra lines saying I want to go to the Pentagon, every position I could find in the Pentagon. And I'm on a Japanese base, and the phone rings, and someone says, Dylan, the phone's for you. Great. I grabbed the phone. Now, I had not met General Fields. I had not heard of him. I didn't know he'd taken over from the previous general. But as an
Yeah.
exchange officer, General Fields is kind of in not in my chain of command, but he would be the next up. He says, Dylan, this is General Fields. Sorry I couldn't get you into the Pentagon. You want to come to Hawaii and work for me? Now, as a major, I'm not used to generals calling me on the phone, much less at my place in Kamaki, which would be
Yeah.
hard to call.
Yeah. That doesn't happen. That
So
doesn't
I was
happen.
pretty sure it was a crank call. This is a crank call. This is not a real general.
And my
One of my
uncandid camera.
friends. And who's going to call and say, do you want to come to Hawaii? That doesn't happen. I put the Pentagon in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hawaii? Sure, I'll go to. So, yes, sir, I'd love to go to Hawaii. Great. We'll set the paperwork up and hang up the phone. I'm like, all right, which one of my friends did this? And I'm trying to go through a Rolodex in my mind to see who should I go and see who set me up. And then my boss calls, Mr. Tom Hasebe. He says, Dylan, the General Fields call. Uh, yes, that wasn't a prank. And so that's how I ended up at PACAF. And you trained both
Well,
of those guys. That's incredible.
that's
That is.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
But
and
so,
the contrast of the experience is what was interesting because one was tense build up, everybody given the protocol ahead of time, and the second one was there's nothing. I just laid back and chatted on a sofa with the general and his wife, General Fields. So it was like two different things. Hey, but
yeah.
Maya, I know we're getting close to
Burt
halftime
Fields.
for the commercial time, right? My
Yes.
it's
Yes,
off
we are.
now.
We are. Yes.
So we got to do our sponsor. So take it
We have
away,
to.
Maya. Stop.
Thank you very much, Tim. And after that, we'll continue with the story. But before that, so I want to say thank you to Houze and Houze Inc. So that is the company that is also based in Yokohama and which offers bilingual services in custom home design, construction, and renovation. They also do commercial building construction. So if you want to work with them, which we do recommend, please reach out to Hana Urshizawa Howell. She is on LinkedIn, and you will also find her contact details in the description of the YouTube video. She is available via email at hannah@kanachu.com. She represents both companies as well, so do not hesitate to reach out and talk with her. Talk with James as well. Thank you very much for this reminder, Tim. And I wanted to actually talk and ask Dylan with all these skills and I mean that training you received in the military, what happened? How eventually could you get a job here in Japan? Because I imagine that the first couple of months it was difficult with your attitude, as you mentioned earlier. What happened? How did you get a job? Why did you get it? Was it something that you wanted to have, or was it just a stepstone for the next one? These are all questions that I hope we can talk about now.
You know what's fascinating? Like Tim said, we didn't really have a master plan, a grand plan. We just took what came next.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I had a great company lined up. I won't mention the name here, but it is a great company who, at the last minute, decided they didn't want to hire me.
Oh,
So I actually tried to get back in the military because I didn't have any other options. The military said, "No, you signed out. We need the budget for the rest of the year. Sorry,
mm,
enjoy." And so I actually had an introduction from Mr. Moynihan, who you may be familiar with. And Mr. Moynihan, different spelling than me, Monahan, my cousin Moynihan, introduced me to Greg Story. Dr. Greg Story is the founder of Japan's, well, kind of like the person who grew Dale Carnegie training in Japan.
Hmm.
He took it over from someone else, but when he took it
He
over,
was a guest.
it
He
was
was been one of our podcast guests, by the way, in the
he is
past.
great.
So yeah.
And
Yes.
so from the introduction from Moynihan to Dr. Story, he pulled me on board, and I was, how do you go from military guy flying airplanes, very technical role. I was able to solve problems, but I'd never sold things the way you might do it at Dale Carnegie. In other words, I'm selling programs to HR professionals. I didn't
Right.
know what an HR professional was. So in that
Yeah.
first startup, Dr. Story really gave me the insights for what it means to run a business. Picture this. I went from being military thinking I'm just bright, shiny, I got everything, people are going to fall all over me, to that's not how it works. What are you going to do for me? Why should I give you money? Tell me why I should do that. And learning how to get those stories out. So
Mm-hmm.
I also thought I knew Japan, but at the embassy, I jump in a van, they drive me to the next meeting place. It's the same meeting places all the time. Now I'm out on my own, ringing doorbells, picking up phones, calling people, and trying to get them to sign up for the Dale Carnegie training programs. Great programs, by the way. Highly, highly recommend the
Yeah.
main Dale Carnegie training program and the sales programs, presentation skills.
Yeah.
Being able to go into different companies and understand what it takes to convince someone to sign on to get training was my training.
Wow. And yeah, I can imagine the shock because I never went to the military, of course, it goes without saying, and didn't have the attitude of a military person, but I was very, very shy in the beginning, and it took me actually several years to get over this shyness and start talking to people, become able to talk to people. And then look into what they were saying, hear what they were saying, not just listen to them, right? So I don't know how it was for you, and but yeah, for me it was a very, very difficult process actually getting beyond that barrier, of knocking on people's not doors but screens, for example, right? And talking with them, talking with colleagues that or counterparts that I have never met before.
I love that. Did you happen to take a Dale Carnegie training course by any
Oh
chance?
no, I didn't. I worked for a Japanese company, and they gave me no choice actually. So it was, I oh, well, actually, it's not that they didn't give me any choice, but I also, my first couple of years, I went out with my colleagues, Japanese colleagues, and some of them were very talkative, and they really had that very good attitude towards me, and they realized that I needed time to learn. So I learned from them in action. I didn't take any courses, but all of those guys and women, who I went out with, they were really great. They were great salespeople. They were great talkers, and yeah, we worked very well together on the way.
Trial by fire.
Here's a
Yeah.
question for both of you. In my case, so I was in sales for 4 or 5 years, and I had never done it before. I didn't know what I didn't know. I thought I'd be, great.
Hmm.
I'd love it. And what I learned was I was okay doing it with Japanese clients because it was really about developing networks and relationships. It was more process oriented. I wasn't as comfortable doing it with fellow Americans where there's this more aggressive stance you're expected to take. It's yeah, yeah. I don't want to say pushy, and people who are good at it can do it without coming across as pushy. I mean, there's really good salespeople, but it was just I enjoyed doing it with one culture and not the other. Although the downside is the Japanese also expect you if anything goes wrong, you can't hand it off to another department and move on like you can with American companies. You got to like stay with it until that thing's resolved. So
Right.
80% of my time was the customer service side of servicing my Japanese clients. And the Americans, when I could just say, oh, yeah, yeah, QC, take it over, So Anyway, just my thoughts. I had different feelings about it in the different cultures. Any of that going on?
You know, it's great you mentioned that. Uh, my entire career has been in sales after leaving the military. And actually, I was in sales in the military, in the foreign military sales program, where I
Mm-hmm.
learned a lot of skills there. I just had to tweak them. I think
Right.
people have a misconception of what sales is. And you brought it up, the pushy salesman, the one that's trying to get you to sign the line that is dotted and do it now, always be closing. These are can be a part of your toolkit, but the most important thing when doing sales is to understand what the customer wants. I'll give you a quick
Mm-hmm.
example that's from my personal experience. I was a terrible salesperson to begin with, by the way. I was not very good. But I had an experience where I'm trying to buy something that I always think back to. I'm in
Mm-hmm.
Hawaii. I've just moved to Hawaii, and I need a car. And I've already picked out, I want a Honda Odyssey minivan. And in Hawaii it was odd, but new cars were cheaper than used cars. Weird. Okay, I
Oh.
didn't want to buy a new car, but if it's cheaper, I'll take it. So
Yeah.
I've picked out the model, I picked out the all the features. I know everything that I want, and I've got a cashier's check ready to go. I'm ready. I'm going to pay for this cash. It's not even taking out a loan. I know what I want. I walk into the first car dealer, and I could see them inside the shark cage, all the salesmen lined up, and I could see they sent out the young guy, go get him. It was like a Wednesday, and there's nobody in the lot. So I'm walking around the lot, and sure enough, the young kid comes out, and there happens to be a car right near us. So he starts telling me all the features of this car, how many cylinders it has, how much power, how many cup holders. He is just listing out everything. And then he tells me, what will it take to get you into this car today? And remember, I've got in my pocket
Gosh,
full of
that's an
cash.
original expression.
Yeah. And I know what car I'm going to buy. What did I say to the young man? Just looking. Turned around and
Oh.
left. I went to the next Honda dealer where I expected similar treatment. And the next Honda dealer, I'm walking around the lot. There were a few more people on the lot, but no one came out to molest me. No one accosted me. No one even looked at me. And I'm out there for longer than I think is appropriate. By now, a salesman should come after me. So I turn and start heading into the door. I guess I'll go inside. And just as I get to the door, a kind young lady opens the door for me and says, good afternoon. Are you here to buy a car? Well, yes. Great. Have a seat and a salesman will be over. Would you like something to drink? Yes. What would you like? Here's our menu. Oh, I'll take this. Thank you. So the drink comes. The salesman shows up. I hear that you're here to buy a car. Do you know what you want? I've got the piece of paper. I pull it out and hand it to him. It's got the price, got everything, got all the features. Like, I want this. Says, great. Hang on. It says here you want it in this gray color. Now, the gray color is on another island. It'll take 2 days to ship it here. Or I can get you a blue one now. Which one would you like? I'd like the gray. Great. Is this how much you want to pay? Yes. Sign here. That was it.
Sale done.
Mhm.
What was the difference?
Mm. Well, singing your own song or listening to your customer, right? So, yeah.
No,
Solve the
yeah,
customer's problem. And so find out why the customer is here. By the way, people who walk in that dealership have one of three things. They come to buy parts, they come for service, they come to buy a car. So the
Hmm.
triage at that door was to send people to one of those places.
yeah,
And they were well trained on how to close a deal. They were the number one Honda sales on the island of Oahu. The son actually was, his father owned a dealership, but did not
Hmm.
let his son work in the dealership, sent him to the U.S. Mainland to go work on other dealerships to learn what it's like in the
yeah.
cutthroat world. So when he came back, he was ready. That
Right.
experience didn't play well in my first sales call where I just talked nonstop because I thought it was all about affinity. You talk about getting to know your customer. I thought I would just wow them with how much I'm interested in them, right? I'm interested in
Yeah,
you. I was interested in the wrong
yeah,
things and never asked them what they wanted for training.
Hmm.
So at the end of what was supposed to be a 30-minute call, it was 90 minutes, like way over. I thought we had great rapport. I get back to Greg's store. I'm like, Greg, they love us. They are going to close on the dotted. They're going to buy it from us. I love this. I can feel it. He goes, "Oh, is that right? Do you know that after you left, she called me up and said, never send this salesman ever again. He was horrible."
Ouch.
Wow. Ouch. That was my
Oh,
first
Ouch.
sales call, and the customer that I thought was on board, and then my next customer I thought was pretty clever. I'd spent so much time going and asking, investigating, learning. I'm learning, getting better now. And I'd run out of things to say. It's my third visit to the customer, and I don't know what else to say. What else can I tell him to get them to buy? He's not buying. I looked at him and says, "Are you ready to buy now?" He says, "Yes." "Were you ready to buy on the very first day I came in?" "Yes." "Were you waiting for me to ask you?" "Yes." And this was a Japanese buyer. And that taught me another lesson. We don't need to keep talking. Ask the customer if they're ready for the sale. They'll tell
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Mm.
I still think it, yes, it's true. And it also depends on the customer, like everything else. But I also know that sometimes Japanese salesmen and saleswomen, they just go to say hello and say nothing else. Just go say hello and leave the office, and that's it.
you. If you
But
are a Japanese salesperson who just goes in to say hello to your customer,
mm-hmm,
please, please give Greg Story a call. Check out the Dale Carnegie program. Follow with the sales training program and
mm-hmm,
presentation skills. It will pay its dividends in spades. That is not how to win a sale. That
okay,
may be the way Japan does it because it's just been done that way for years. This guy shows up more than the other guys. Eventually, I'll buy from him or gal. But I would much prefer people find out what the customer needs, visit, see if the thing they have is working, and then follow up and see how it's going, just like you said, Tim. The Japanese customer expects the salesperson to handle it cradle to grave. But ask,
Yeah.
ask.
mm, yeah. Well, great. And then what else? Okay, so we know about the sales skills. That's an important point that, well, was maybe the first step of you navigating the civil world. And what else can you tell us about navigating Japan and its
You
business
know,
environment here?
when you're in the military, it's very clear who's in charge because everyone has rank on their shoulder. You don't have to remember people's names because their name's right there on the uniform. You can
Mm-hmm.
find their bio online. You know everything about them before you even meet them. When I met General Rice, I knew he was a B-52 pilot. I knew where he was stationed. I knew his whole history, and I could instantly strike up conversation. Actually, you can't. He was very professional. He didn't do casual conversation. But in the civil world, that's a lot harder. Who's in charge? What's their relationship? So I would suggest if you're going to do sales, if you're going to join a company, if you're going to do something, do your research. Jump on LinkedIn. Go search the web. Find out who is where. Make your own organizational chart. You need to know where people sit and what drives them because a company is not one person or one thing. And
Mm-hmm.
every person in the company has a different view of what that company is. Understand that. And here's another piece of advice that I think people miss. You get a job and you look at the position description. You read it and go, all right, this is my job. Well, here's a little secret, folks. Position descriptions are written by managers in a rush because HR told me you needed to hire somebody. They don't really know exactly what's supposed to be in that position description. It's probably old. It's probably a copy of some other thing. They're doing their best, but they're hoping that you know what you need to do at the company. This sounds weird. You think the company would know. It's not true. You are the professional. That's why they're hiring you. They're hiring you
Mm-hmm.
to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
That means you have to go find the network. That means you have to figure out the scope of your job. And the way I do it, and the way I recommend, is what does your boss need to be successful? Find that out.
Yeah.
And what does your boss's boss need to be successful? What does the
Mm-hmm.
CEO need to be successful? Write those down, flesh it out, and then your role becomes very clear. Because if you're working really hard on stuff that's not important to anybody, they don't need you. If you're working hard on the things that make the boss comfortable, happy, and successful, now you're talking about what you should be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, very,
Write
very,
your
very
own
true.
job description. Write your own
Mm-hmm.
job description. You create it. Like,
Absolutely.
That's how, yeah, that's always been how I did it. And I like it that way, you know. So,
Everyone should. Now, there are roles where that's not appropriate. There are roles where literally you are just hired to do this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
But I'll tell you what,
I don't want that job anyway. So, but go ahead.
well,
Okay.
even for those jobs,
Yeah.
when I was, well, I was 13 years old, I worked at a photo lab, and they told me exactly what I would be doing. It's just, I'm 13. I'm in a photo lab, it's all adults. I'm just the gopher. I'm the guy who runs around and does the stuff nobody else wants to do, which I thought was great. Nobody else wants to do it, I'll learn. And so I mixed chemicals, I replaced chemicals in the machines, I repaired some of the machines. That's at 13. And because I looked at what the boss needed, what did the president, what did the owner of this photo lab need? I started getting into sales. I said, how do I sell film? I'll give you a quick example. You had some Ilford XP film, which was more expensive. All the other film was Kodak, and it was about $4 a roll. This Ilford XP was $8 a roll. It was not selling, it was getting dust. I called the president over and I said, sir, we need to lower the price of this Ilford XP film. No one's buying it. I'm 13. He looked at me and goes, no one's buying it? Watch this, Dylan. Remember, this is the 80s. There's no internet. In front of that box of XP film, he changed the price to $16, double the 8, and then put a big slash through it and said 50% off, $8. I
Yeah.
sold every roll that day.
Yeah.
Manipulation.
Sales tricks. Yes.
And
That's
so I learned messaging. I learned how to establish. They gave me the nickname Vice President because I was always finding things that could be improved at the office.
Yeah.
And as a result, they gave me more duties and responsibilities. At 13, they gave me the mopeds that were used for deliveries. I was in charge of taking care of those. Never mind, I didn't have a license. But they kept offloading things that they were giving to adults because I could do
Mhm.
them. And so even if your position description just says these things, what does your boss need? Go solve those problems. You'll find you'll get better promotions than anyone else.
Mm.
But that's my
I
story.
agree.
Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much how it worked for me. I I started out, I cut my teeth in manufacturing with Japanese bosses,
Mhm.
and I quickly learned Hoden So, Hokoku Renrak Sodan, and mostly because I was totally clueless. So like this was a new field for me. I spoke conversational Japanese, but I didn't know anything about manufacturing. I'd look up a word in from Japanese, look it up in English. I didn't know what the English word was either. So I was
Yeah.
like lost. And so by default, I had to do the hold and soul, but he didn't really tell me what to do. So I was just looking for holes to fill selfishly because I wanted to learn. Like I'm like, okay, here's my chance. There's paying me. I get a chance to learn, right?
Right.
Um, and I did that, and it was very good training, not only for understanding my boss, but there were patterns across all the Japanese bosses I had, and certain things they wanted, and how to win their trust. Like that was really important. And the way to win their trust is you keep your promises, you do things proactively, and you go to them and keep them informed. And the more you do that, the more they back off because they know that if something comes up, they trust that you're going to come to them right away. But then you get to a point in your career where you're like, okay, now some of these guys I'm working for are not that great. I feel like I don't really want to work for them. I go out on my own. I don't want any bosses, right? Naively, you think that, and then you go out on your own. I go out on my own, and I realize now everybody's my boss. All my customers are my bosses. I've actually increased my number of bosses by being my own boss, right? Um, which is how it should be. That's how you really should. But you don't see it until you're on your own. You're like, oh my god, I got to do
Mhm.
what they tell me, or at
You know,
Yeah.
it
least
is
figure it out, how to work with them, right?
it,
So,
it is humbling. I did find when you have that many bosses and the customer is my boss, I found that there were some customers I had to cut loose. There
oh
were some
yeah, yeah,
customers that were not, but this was something I was not aware of. I thought I could solve
yeah,
everyone's problem and that
Right,
it
right.
didn't matter. But I learned that at some point you have to take a look and say, is this customer worth keeping?
Mm-hmm.
Or worth letting in the first place. Like you have to learn how to vet your customers and say, okay, I'm walking away from this. And I learned to do that by times I did not walk away and it was a disaster. But I learned those
Trial by
lessons. I'm like,
fire.
okay, this is never gonna happen again. One customer tried to micromanage my content.
Oh.
I got to do it the way I do it, storytelling. If but I let them do it. They were a big client, and it just was a big fail. I said, okay, from now on, I'm going to walk away from anybody who wants to micromanage my content.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just one example for me, but vetting them, right?
You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting. You mentioned work for a Japanese company. At Maya, you probably have this experience. I discovered that in Japan, inside a Japanese company, praise is something rare.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
It is it is
Um,
common to get criticized. And what I have to teach new people, if you're working in a Japanese company and you're frustrated that all you get is criticism,
yeah.
notice that as you're getting better, as your product is improving, you get fewer and fewer critiques, or the critiques are more and more specific, like you use the wrong font. When you get critiqued for the font or the period or the size of the letters or the
Right.
position on the page, that means you're doing great. That means
Right.
Exactly.
all
Yeah.
the heavy
Yeah.
lifting you did fine,
Yeah.
but I can't praise you. I got to find something wrong.
No, the
And so,
critique
That's
is the
true.
praise. The critique is the
yes,
praise. They're praising you by
exactly.
saying, I care enough about you to keep looking
Yes,
at you because I believe you
indeed.
can get better. No,
Yeah, it's
that's how
true.
I,
Yeah,
yeah,
but it's
sometimes
very
try to look
true.
at it.
Yeah. I have a story because it's very true, Dylan, what you said that in Japanese companies, praise is very rare. And I I have a memory, of one instance when my boss said, Maya-chan, yoku yatta ne. And I was just so worried about that. And I'll tell you why. Because my boss, he was born and raised in Kyoto. And then people in Kyoto, they have a different culture. And when they say plus, it means minus. And so I was so worried about those words of his that I went around my colleagues and I asked everybody, individually, what do you think this means? And they were, don't worry, so Abe-san, he has lived, in the United States. He has, he left Kyoto and his home so many years, decades ago. You don't have to worry about it. It means praise. And I was like, no, no, it cannot mean praise. It really means something different. Tell me what it means. Be honest. And it's funny because obviously it was what it was. I mean, on face value. And I eventually, got to accept it. But it was such a scare for me, really a scare. So eventually, I'm going to work with my boss even now. I mean, next year once again, because just like your general, Dylan, he called me and he said, "Well, I want you on the team, so let's work on this project together." So even now, when I think back about that incident, I laugh, but it was really such a scare for me because I was very eager to continue there, and I didn't know I was already a Seishain, that is a permanent employee. But back then, I was so naive, and I didn't know that if even if I made a mistake or somebody said something critical of my work, they couldn't fire me, right? It was very difficult for the company to hire me, but I was just scared. Yeah.
We call that damning with faint praise. And there in Japan, there is a special art to doing it. And so you're right. If someone's praising you and they add the wa after it, これはいいね. That wa is, people always wonder how to use ga versus wa. And the way I like to explain it is wa is contrast. As for this, you did great. Meaning the other stuff is crap. So listen for that wa as people are praising you, and be careful when you're using it. I once, only once, said to a young lady, 今日は綺麗ですね.
今日はね.
And
That's
you're beautiful today. What they heard
But
was,
only
Tim, what
today.
did they hear? Do you know?
Yeah.
As for today, you're beautiful, but all the other days, not so hot.
hmm.
Not
My
so
mom
hot.
used
That's
to call
the
that a
wow trap.
left-handed
So when
compliment. A left-handed compliment.
Yeah. Right.
exactly, and so when you learn about this at work, you listen for that extra word thrown in. You're like, "Oops, I missed the mark." What is it?
Yeah.
This is great. Yoku yatta ne? That typically means you did a good job.
On that point, I once asked. I wrote an article about passive aggressive, right? And like,
Yeah,
if you look it up in Japanese, there's a word, but nobody uses it. And I just started talking to family and friends, Japanese family and friends. I like, how here's what it means. I would explain it in Japanese. They go, is there a Japanese word? And they're like, one of my friends was spot on. He goes, you know what? It's so embedded into the way we think. We don't even have a word for it. It's like a fish doesn't see water. It's just
exactly.
part of it. So we never signal, took it out and gave it a label, which
Right.
there's some truth to that, So,
Yeah. But we have
but
here from
Irish moms are passive aggressive too, though. Just so you know. Um,
well, I think that everywhere in the world it happens. So yeah.
It
So
is true.
yeah, it
I do get
is.
one question. Do Japanese people provide fake praise? Was a question someone once gave me. And I'll give you an example. My first week in Japan, I'm staying in a hotel, and the hotel staff said Ohio, and I had no idea what that meant. And I was like, "What did you say?" And they said Ohio, so I just monkeyed back Ohio, and they said your Japanese is Jozu desu ne. Of course, I didn't know what
yeah,
Jozu
Joseph.
was.
Yeah.
So what is that?
Yeah.
What is that praise? And I have to explain that in Japan, there's kind of a script that you use with foreigners. And
Yeah.
if they say a word, you say they're good. If you're a customer and the customer asks for something, you're polite to the customer. There's a relationship built on the situation. No
Yes.
one is an individual. Everyone's connected to everyone else through some mechanism,
Hmm.
which is why when you're walking through Shibuya or Shinjuku Station, someone bumps into you, no one says, I'm sorry, because they don't know what the connection is. So therefore, there isn't a reason to apologize. I will tell you that older folks will say this is not true. You should apologize anyway. But my observation is people who don't know you will bump into you until they know who you are, what your position is at that point. And only at that point can you have a conversation.
Yeah. Well,
Certainly in the big city. Certainly in the big city. I
hmm,
feel that. Yeah.
I'm absolutely in the big city, yes.
yeah.
And most of my time is in all of the big cities. The countryside has its own special charm where everyone stares at me for being a foreigner. And then, should I dare speak Japanese, their jaw drops, they look around, and they try to figure out where the sound is coming from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get a
Indeed.
lot of that.
Okay, so let me read some of the comments. We've got Hiroko Yoshida-san. She's here. And Dylan, maybe you remember her name and her from your 555
Ah,
sessions.
yes,
But
indeed.
yes.
いつもお世話になっております。よろしくお願いします。
Yes, so she says, I'm very happy to see you. And Hiroko-san is, yes, she comes to our podcast very often. Hiroko-san, thank you very much for this.
Thank
And
you.
ありが
yes,
とう。5時55分よろしくお願いします。
right. And she also says Japanese men never praise their wives in public, which is also, yes, very, very true. And also she writes that about, praise rather than praise. She writes, I would say recognition is actually rare. So
Yes.
in Japanese companies. And yes, also another comment she makes, which I actually agree with her based on what I have been through with my Japanese colleagues, is that I don't think that kind of sales approach would work in Japan. We first try to build a good relationship with the customer, especially in the consumer service and hospitality business sector. So
Oh,
yeah,
we buy from people we like. Absolutely. I have
yes,
no, absolutely right.
And
And that works anywhere. You buy from people you like.
exactly,
and
yes.
yeah, I'll say I think one of the best sales. I had a Japanese friend who was in sales, and he was pretty good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And he met my wife, and he heard her engaging with people on the phone. And he turns to me, he goes, "Your wife is a natural salesperson." And the reason we were in the service industry, so some of it was tourism. This is when we were in Hawaii in the Hilo area. She would get a call, a random call from somebody, and just naturally she'd be engaged with them and had a very high percentage of making the sale because but she doesn't think of herself as a salesperson. She knows how to engage people. And I
Mm-hmm.
think my matter, and even with kids, she engages them, right? So people who have that exist in Japan and in any culture.
Any
And kind
culture.
of to your point, Dylan, like everybody says Japanese are relationship oriented. I said that too. Like especially and Hiroko-san said the same thing, right? It's about
Yeah.
building relationships, right? But the best salespeople in the US know that as well. They're the ones
Absolutely.
who figure it out, and they do keep their eye on the long term, but they can also balance it with with shorter term things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's not like Japanese are the only way to do it, but I just think in America you got to be kind of in the elite special category to know that and practice it well. And I'm guessing Dylan, you're in that elite category. You seem very
Hardly,
good at
Yeah.
hardly.
engaging people. And you got the humility, Japanese humility thing going too. So that's charming as well.
Yes, it is great.
I
And
have
I
to tell
want,
you,
yeah.
if you want to do sales, you're never good enough. Learning about selling is like taking a bath. You don't take a bath
Mm,
once and you're good for the next 10 years.
right. Yeah.
Always be learning. Always brush up on your skills. Always ask for feedback. None of us have this wired. We're all still learning every day.
And critique
Yeah.
yourself ongoing. Always critique yourself. It's
Always.
easier
Yeah.
to, with the intention of improving and looking forward to it. That's how you got to stay motivated. But yeah, I yes, I learned so much doing it. And sometimes they're counterintuitive. Looking at issues sometimes turn it upside down, and sometimes that's the solution staring you in the face, right? I used to call purchasing people when I first started. I
Mm.
didn't know what I was doing, and a salesman. He was a really good salesman. He came to my desk. He heard me. He goes, "Sullivan, you got it all wrong. You don't call purchasing people. They're listening to salespeople all day. That you're the last person they want to talk to." I go, "Who should I call?" He goes, "Call their salespeople. They like to talk, and they'll tell you all about their company, and meet them for lunch and get to know them, and then bring them to our company and show them around, then ask them to take to your company, and then ask them to introduce you to somebody in purchasing." Like that's how he
Mm.
framed it, but it was counterintuitive. Like, oh, call the salespeople. That's stuff
Yeah.
like that there was always a way in, that I always, but again, the American salespeople who are really good know this intuitively. It's in their bones. All right.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
Sale, and by the way, if anyone's out there thinking of getting a career in sales, contact me anytime.
there you
Sales
go.
is an
Dylan's your
amazing
man.
career.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I'm the best, but what little I've learned, I'm happy to share.
Yeah.
Great. That's
You're the
wonderful.
man. And we
Yeah.
endorse you, Dylan. You're the guy. You're the guy.
Yes. And
Hey,
I'm
I know a guy. Yeah, I know a guy.
I know some
right.
people. I'll have my
Okay.
people contact your people. Yeah.
Okay, let me read another comment from Timothy Langley this time. So, what a fabulous interview. I learned so much again, and great to learn more about Dylan, who I have known for years. So,
Oh,
you guys,
right
this
on.
is such a valuable service to our community. Merry Christmas, and thank you for enriching my life. So, thank you, Timothy. Well, you're definitely part of this community. So,
Tim
uh,
Langley Esquire. It has been a
yes,
while, but yes, we go way back. Really, really
wait,
great to hear from you. Merry Christmas. All the best to you and your family.
great.
And
Yeah.
and Tim, do you still have the roles?
The what?
The Rolls Royce.
The Rolls Royce. Oh,
Oh,
yes,
Timothy
yes,
Langley. Oh, Timothy
yes.
Langley. I
Yes.
think he does. Pretty sure he does.
Right. Yes,
What a
he does.
beautiful car. Yes.
Yes. Okay,
Hey,
and
Maya,
then
we have gone over.
we
We
have
were
gone.
having so
Yes,
much fun with this conversation. We could be yapping on again.
right.
Maybe we could have you back on in the future, Dylan. And
Yes,
Maya, I know you
Dylan.
got to take us home, with our final sponsor message.
Yes,
So
yes,
take it away,
definitely
Maya.
so. Okay, thank you very much for this. Before that, just a message to you, Dylan, from Hiroku-san. Please resume 5:55. That's her message. Okay.
That's a big compliment. Thank you for
Yes,
that. She must
great
be happy.
compliment. Thank you very much, Hiroku-san. And now it's really time to say goodbye, of course. And first of all, say thank you to our sponsors. They are Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku or Kanchu. You can find them at kanachu.com and connect with James Howell at kanachu.com, of course, and also with Hannah, and she represents Houze Inc. and Kanachu as well. So do not hesitate to work with them. We do recommend their services because they will hear you and do their best to meet your needs and help you with your project. Also, thank you very much to everybody who stayed with us today. We've got a message from Scott Silver. Yes, this is an all-star show today. As always, brings back memories, the good old days at Clubhouse. Thank you very much, Scott. Yes, we had good days there. And it was wonderful to meet you there first. Dylan, thanks a lot for your time on Christmas morning.
Thank you so much. Please come
Thank you
again.
very much. Please come again. Yes, and
Thanks so
let's
much. Merry
continue.
Christmas, everybody.
Merry
Merry
Christmas.
Christmas. Happy holidays. Yo yo
Happy
toshi.
holidays.